Okay, so I'm Chelsea McLeish. It is the 26th of April 2021 and it's 12 minutes past 3. So could you just state your name for me, please?
Yeah, I think the screen has come up that it's being recorded and it's asking me to, this meeting is being recorded, leave meeting or continue. I guess you'd like me to press continue.
Yes, please.
Okay, that's got rid of that on the screen.
Perfect.
Peter Starr Jameson, and Starr spelt Starr, in memory of Leander Starr Jameson of Jameson Raid and Boer War fame. Date of birth 11th of January 1963. And what was the rest of the question, please?
That's everything. That's perfect. Thank you. Okay, so this is part of the it's the project called Socially Distanced Encounters of a Rural Kind. It's with Bournemouth University and Chase Chalke Landscape Partnership. So get straight into it. So just your occupation now would be great.
Okay, well, my main occupation is the building industry. Originally as a carpenter joiner, presently a surveyor's assistant. But what I'm on tape today for is my Saturday job for the last 24 years as a part-time charcoal burner, or to use the historical name, a wood collier. Because before coal was dug out of the ground, coal was charcoal.
I didn't know it was called a wood collier. Do you know where that name originates from, or how it switched?
As much as I know is before, or I'll effectively say to you, charcoal, the fuel that changed the world, because it enabled man to smelt iron. So it's what kicked off the Iron Age, and it is equally what fueled the Industrial Revolution originally in England before Abraham Darby perfected turning coal into coke, which 1737-ish or something from memory. There is a charcoal burner who taught me earth burning, who used to be with the Weald Downland Museum in Sussex, called Alan Walters. He will know more than I as to where the name came from. As much as I know is wood collier is the historic title.
Oh, perfect. Okay, so about charcoal burning, when did you first get introduced to it? If you said 24 years.
Yes, or no, I've got me maths wrong. 27 years, because in 1990 there was a major gale in this neck of the woods. There was also the 87 gale, but that affected Kent and Sussex more than it affected us. But the 1990 gale definitely affected Dorset, and it put an awful lot of trees over on the deck. So effectively, forestry was in a bit of a mess with a lot of wood sitting on the ground. And what do we do with it? And the forestry trade press, because I've always had an interest in forestry, were suggesting charcoal is one way of doing a cleanup of the woods and getting the cleanup paid for by the product, something that would be otherwise uneconomic to do. So I went over to some woods, Bradfield St Clair in Suffolk, so very interesting copse, owned by a monastery, and they've got records of continuous coppicing for the last 600 years. Oh, wow. Didn't realise the quality of what I was looking at when I was over there for the short course, but I've realised since, and I've been back to look since. Did a short course in charcoal, and then there was a guy that I've known for many years, who possibly you ought to interview, John Davidson, who was charge hand forester of the Cranborne estate. He is retired now, and he equally knew somebody he was interested in, somebody who he had trained was interested in producing charcoal, a guy called Oliver Nixon. So he introduced myself and Oliver, and equally, when Oliver had been made redundant from a large estate, replaced by a harvesting machine, he wrote to every single farmer in the Yellow Pages saying, have you got a bit of scabby woodland you would like managed? Because the grant system at that time was quite good. And he ended up managing Hyde Farm at Dameron within the Cranborne Chase, which had some overstood hazel that was ideal for charcoal and some windblow. And we started off with an oil barrel and lit that 10 times in order to make a small quantity for some test marketing. We did some test marketing. We found we could sell it. Oliver and myself, the partnership, after about 3-4 years, because he was tree surgeon during the week, I was building trade during the week. We did it as a Saturday job. 3-4 years down the line, wife, kids, other interruptions, partnership wasn't working too smooth. We amicably went our separate ways, but I remained at Hyde Farm, which at that time was owned by Dominic Wigan. 14 years ago, the farm changed hands. Cranborne Estate bought it. By agreement, I was going to do a year away, so there was no question of continuous tenancy or anything like that. Unfortunately, I broke my ankle in the middle of that year, a silly accident at home, and then because of that, it was sort of 3 months before I could push a wheelbarrow, and then 6 months before I could push a fully loaded wheelbarrow. So what should have been a year charcoaling in another wood was actually the best part of 2 years charcoaling in another wood. But that was hither till Copse, which is also belongs to Cranborne Estate. And again, of historic note of that, if you're aware of Cranborne Ancient Technology Centre and their replica Viking longhouse, the Viking longhouse with the chestnut cedar shingle roof, they Cranborne Estate gave them some big chestnut to make the shingles from, so they had the straight, not free bits, and of course they wanted the wood tidied up. So what do? You send in the woodland hoover, you send in the charcoal burner.
Of course.
And I had the pleasure of putting all the knotty bits, all the bent bits, all the lop and top that the brambles had grown up through. That all went into the charcoal kiln. But having earlier said to you that charcoal is the fuel that changed the world, part of the reason of making charcoal is it burns at approximately twice the temperature of wood. So it enables you to work metal and smelt iron ore and make iron. But the other thing about charcoal burning is going back to your sort of period of history that you're interested in, when everything was a bit more horsepower. Charcoal is 1/7 the weight. So if you are moving fuel from the country where there is a lot of wood into the town where there isn't, instead of taking 7 pack horses of heavy wood, you could take 1 pack horse of charcoal, yeah. And it would be the same, if you like, fuel power. So again, part of the reason the charcoal burner made his living is it was moisture reduction, leaving the volatiles in the wood, making a lighter fuel for ease of transport. Or again, ships that went to sea, they didn't want to be taking on vast amounts of wood to cook their meals. They preferred to take on this lighter stuff called charcoal, and historian Peter Roberts, in his book History of Minstead, makes reference to charcoal burners that had shares in Southampton sailing cutters, and that they went down to Cornwall, again a place with very little trees.
Right there. I'd love to go back later to what you said about why you think the craft is still so alive, but at the moment I'd just like to talk about I've done quite a bit of research about the actual process of charcoal burning, but I'd really like to hear it from an actual charcoal burner. So could you like explain it? It's a lot different to hear it than to try and read it. So
okay, well, you cut yourself some cordwood, and that is overstood hazel. That is about 2.5 inch, but sort of 2.5 inch to 4 inch is ideal. So you cut yourself some wood. You season it for at least 6 months, and a 12-month is better to get the first lot of moisture out of it. And I make charcoal in what is called a ring kiln, which is made of steel. They have been about since Napoleonic times, but back then it was only the crown burners that could afford to have one, because they were given one. Pre-war it was mostly earth burns, but these days steel kilns are now retorts. So in my case, I stack the wood in a steel kiln with a bit of pattern to it, to enable the air to circulate and the fire to initially get going. And you get your packet of Swan Vestas and light a small kindling fire, and then drop some fire into it. And to make charcoal, you are basically cooking the wood. So you do burn some, but from your school days, you possibly remember on the blackboards the burning triangle of fire. For fire, you need fuel, oxygen, and ignition. Take any one of those three away, and the fire stops. So in the case of fire, you would have that, and you would end up with ash. Now, we want to end up with charcoal. So what we've got, the fuel, we've got the ignition, but we only give it about half the air the fire would ideally like. And that way, it heats up the wood, cooks the wood, and at about 500, 550 degrees C, it converts to charcoal. Initially, when you light a kiln, you get a whole lot of white smoke come off. White smoke is mainly water vapor. It then turns to mucky smoke, which is some of the sulfurs, tars, and other impurities in the wood burning off. And then it turns to blue smoke. Blue smoke, you're losing charcoal. So that's the point you want to stop it. You earth the bottom of the charcoal kiln up, you earth the lid up, you remove the oxygen. I referred to the triangle earlier. You've taken away the oxygen, the combustion stops. You leave it to cool for at least 24 hours. I tend to do mine 48 hours, but as I say, that's part of the luxury of being part-time. And you then open it, and you put the shovel in, and good charcoal, when you're shoveling it, tinkles. It sounds like money, and it is money once you get it into the bags.
Oh, wow. How much does it tend to make if you've done it with the steel kiln? For like,
depends on your size of steel kiln. I've got an 8-foot kiln that I reckon to get about 180 kilos out of. I've got a 4'6" kiln that I reckon to get average of 70 kilos out. But in answer to that question, never enough. Never makes enough. It would always be nice to have more. But yes, and equally, I put a steel box in, and I put a little bit of the peeled willow to end up with drawing charcoal. you know, barbecue charcoal, Dorset probably 120 a kilo currently. The lads in Sussex are getting a lot better money for it. They're sort of getting 160 a kilo. But drawing charcoal sort of comes out £2 a box. So it's that's sort of worth doing. And equally, not all of it turns to charcoal. When you were doing your research, did you come across the word brown end or brunt? They refer to it in the Forest of Dean, or brand?
Yeah, I did come across that, but I wasn't quite sure.
Okay, well,
it didn't really explain.
No, I think that's partly because, or this has been part of my, if you like, difficulty with, I won't say resurrecting the craft. I'll come back to that statement in a minute, but certainly learning the finer points. That, if you like, the lads that did it pre-war, that really knew what they were doing, didn't write anything down, probably because they didn't write. So, as you say, it's difficult to do the research. And equally, I've read some historic, some sort of Victorian, some pre-World War II stuff written by, shall we say, archaeologists with an interest in the subject. And you read it and you think to yourself, yeah, you went to some of that charcoal burn. But what I'd really like to read is something written down by somebody who saw it from start to finish, but it doesn't exist. So returning to a brown end, that, particularly the bottom end of it, looks like charcoal. It's very, that is my piece of charcoal, and you can break that. So that is charcoal.
Yeah.
That looks like charcoal, but it don't break. It's so near, but it's not quite. And the reason it's called a brown end is if you open one up with a saw, I used a hacksaw so I didn't blunt a good saw. Can you see how it's like a burnt toast brown colour?
Do you mind just holding it up a little bit higher? Yeah, that's perfect. Thank you. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So the end of that looks like a burnt toast brown colour.
Yeah.
That's why it's a brown end. They're so near charcoal, but not quite. But everything would have been used back and on. I've had Jake Keane, who you've possibly come across in the Cranborne project. He used to be at Cranborne Ancient Technology Centre, and he was the iron smelter featured on Time Team. He likes brown ends to initially warm the flue up. They're not quite as hot as charcoal, but they're not far off. I always reckon with the 8-foot kiln, if I end up with one barrow load of brown ends, that goes back into the kiln at the bottom to get a good heat up initially, make my next burn easier to do. If I get 2 barrow loads of brown ends, I think, there's a barrow load that's going back for the sitting room fire, because it's almost as good as burning coal. So only when I get to the 3rd barrow load of brown ends, when I think, this was not one of your better burns, Pete. You haven't got the charcoal you should. You've got too many brown ends. And yes, once a year I do an earth burn in the Forest of Dean, and in the Forest of Dean they refer to brown ends as brunts. I have to remember to call them brunts to the visitors up there. And again, I think that's charcoal burners pronounced it. They tend to be people that keep their mouth closed so that the dust doesn't get in. So, like a lot of country things had different vernacular names in different places. So steel kilns, Second World War and onwards, in basic terms, to up the production, and also the fact that because of the war there was welding plant about and people knew how to weld things, so all of a sudden in the country they could make steel kilns. It's now evolved to retorts, which is a bit like a steam train boiler. You have the wood you are converting where the steam pipes would be, and you have another fire of lesser quality wood underneath, and you pipe the wood gas, the sort of volatiles that come off at about 300 degrees C, back in to the firebox. So it's more efficient, but it's a piece of kit. You know, a new steel kiln would be something in the order of, don't know. I've had to make my own, but I guess if you went out and bought one, probably £1,000 thereabouts. But a retort is sort of 13. 1300 one sorry, 13,000, 15,000, and the doors need some maintenance. So you're getting more charcoal out, you're using less wood, but it's a major capital investment. Pre the war, it was mainly earth burns, which is what was mainly featured in that YouTube you watched. The advantage is all you need is a level. Charcoal is always produced on what is called a hearth, and if you can drop back on a previously used hearth, you've got fine soil there, hard base and fine soil, and it's nice. And for an earth burn, you need fine soil. You stack the wood, you cover it with hay. Believe bracken was also used, and that's something I'd love to do at some centre somewhere, but because they now know bracken contains carcinogens, they're very nervous about letting one do that. Some say it's the sap when it's fresh, so a way to overcome that would be to put a scythe through it and let it wilt for a day or four, which I believe is what they used to do. And equally, some will say it's the spores, so it's only when it's just beginning to die back that the middle of the year it would be okay. I guess again, pre-war, what, you know, not everybody made it to retirement, so the cancer wasn't such an issue, the heart attack, or you just got worn out, so it didn't matter so much. So yeah, you cover it with hay or bracken. You put a layer of earth on top. You drop some fire down the hole you've left in the middle. You seal it back up with some turf on the top. But we tend to do 12-foot diameter.
Oh, wow.
as the reenactments. And the one on the YouTube video was a bit bigger. I think that was about 15-foot diameter. But 22-foot used to be the industry standard. And you have to, once you've lit them, you've got to stay up with them all day and all night. Right, 3 days, 2 nights. And the only seat you are allowed to sit on is a one-legged stool. Because if you go to sleep on a one-legged stool, you wake up with a bit of a bump. I know that, been there, done that. I will try not to do that during this interview. And the other thing about a one-legged stool is I can sit on it for about an hour and a bit. After that, the back of my legs tend to say it's time for a walk. And equally, even if you think your earth kiln is absolutely A-OK and there's nothing untoward, you always ought to take a walk around it during the night, at least every hour and a bit. So it makes sure you get up and go and tend the kiln. Once you've put a match in a kiln, she's like a lady. You're in her hands. She will tell you when she's ready, and until then, you've got to keep giving her a little bit of attention.
I did see with the video from Ashdown Forest. I think it said it was 4 days and 4 nights for that one.
Yeah, I did that totally unscripted, and I got the short straw. Nobody else wanted to do it. It was actually 4 days and 3 nights.
Oh wow, that's still a really long time. Is everyone there the whole 4 days, or is it taken in shift if there's more people?
We do shifts, and again, this is where I welcome your input as a historian. But I will suggest to you, my understanding is that charcoaling was done in families. So I will suggest to you, you had the young men going out cutting the wood and hauling the wood in, and you'd have the whole family come together to build it. And then it was lit, And on the night shift, you would tend to leave the old guy, the experienced guy. But equally, he'd no longer got the muscle power for dragging in the wood. He'd done that in his time, but unfortunately his time had gone. So, you know, today's standard of health and safety, we have 2 people on the night shift, so that if you trip over and fall in, there's somebody to drag you out. But whether they did that in, shall we say, a lesser standard of health and safety, I wouldn't like to say. So yes, you have 2 of you on shift. Equally, the Forest of Dean earthburn is a little more gentrified, although I should use the word ladyfied, because the hearth master on that is a lady, and we split that into 3 shifts.
Okay, makes sense. I did read up about how it used to be more families. Why do you think, in your opinion, that it's switched more to? Do you think it's just as the wars have gone on and things have changed, it's switched from a family business to?
Yeah, I think steel kilns is an 8-foot steel kiln is a 12-hour day, so it's a long day, but it's still within a day. And equally, ideally, you wouldn't burn one of them; you burn 2 of them. There's character based in Hazelbury Brian, Jim Battle, Dorset Charcoal, good friend of mine. We coincidentally started about the same time, although he's a braver man than I am, because he does it full time, albeit it's only in the last couple of years that he's had the overheads of a wife. So before that, his life was charcoal. He was captain of the village cricket team. So yeah, he did charcoal, pub, talk about cricket, talk about the burn, go back to the burn, pub, cricket, worked in a nice circle. And he reckons, and I agree with him, because on a couple of occasions I've had 4 kilns lit. You seem to be able to look after 4 kilns at a time. Take it beyond 4 kilns, and you just lose a bit. You don't sort of get your maximum yield off kiln number 5 and not kiln number 5, kiln number 6. You don't get as good a yield as you could off all kilns, because you weren't able to give them all your attention. That sort of 4 tends to be maximum you can look after. And equally, quite a good way of working is to have 2 of you and have 2 kilns lit. One that you've lit two days before, 3 days before, that you are unloading. The other one that you've lit two days before, that you are filling up. So if you've got 6 kilns and you sort of aim to light 2 a day, that works through. My charcoal guru, Laurie Gardner, he who was featured in 1976 in the Jack Hargreaves Out of Town series, he used to subcontract for a firm, Charlton Sawmills, from Sussex, and Charlton Sawmills would come in and buy the big trees standing. They would fell them. They would stack the cordwood and leave it in the wood for 2 years, because back then you could leave cut cordwood in the woods and it wouldn't get pinched. And 2 years later, they'd send in the charcoal burners, and most of what he produced went up to the copper smelter in Birmingham in a grain tanker. None of this faffing about putting it in 3 kilo bags for barbecues. Most of what he produced went industrially to the copper smelter. And as I say, him and John Carter used to work 2 kilns. Admittedly, they were double height ring kilns, so that's hard work. But he originally started off with a threshing and ploughing contractor, and he sort of says, if you think charcoal's hard work, you ought to try lifting 2.5 hundredweight corn sacks. So for him, it was lighter graft. And yeah, they used to light 2 a day, empty and fill 2 a day.
Oh wow, that sounds a long process. It does sound
Mm.
as well like a lot of the people in the charcoal burning community are quite close. Do you have any like favorite memories or experiences with like a group of other charcoal burners, or is there like a specific one that stands out?
Well, as I say, there's several. I mean, as I say, having said Laurie Gardner was my charcoal guru, and what was really nice about that is when I first started, because the building sites I work tend to be in the New Forest, various people had told me about him and told me that he never had a phone, so his office was the trusty servant public house at Minstead. So I thought, right, it's no good. We're going to have to go and find him. So I went and find him and bought him a pint, and I'd say various things to him, and he'd sort of mumble a bit, and this went on for about 12 months, and I thought he's going to keep his secrets. He's going to take them with him. But unfortunately, by then I'd got a taste for their beer. So I kept going back for another 12 months, and in hindsight, I'm fairly sure he must have kept a diary, because I'm pretty sure in my own mind that it was 2 years to the day that he turned round and said, "Well, Nipper, I reckon you've got the staying power. I better tell you something about it." So effectively, I'd done my apprenticeship. He wasn't going to give away his secrets easy, but I'd done the distance, so he was going to tell me something about it. And he came out to my kiln site, and yes, he taught me a lot. And in some ways, it perhaps wasn't until I did something like one day I had a burn that was very lopsided, or I said to him, can you do holly? And he said yes. And they did softwoods when they were short of wood. But it wasn't until you asked him the question, because if you said to him, "How do you make charcoal?" he'd say, "Well, you just go in the woods with a box of matches." And in a way, he wasn't being flippant or being awkward. It was just where he hadn't done it all his life. He only did it for a mere 35 years full time. Because I say, he was steep ground ploughing and grain for starters. But where he'd done it for 35 years, it was just so second nature to him that he couldn't understand the question, or he'd just make charcoal, alter it to the wind conditions, alter it to the timber conditions, stack the kiln a bit differently depending on the size of timber. He'd just do it by the experience. He wouldn't need to think, therefore he wouldn't tell you. But equally, a funny story to tell on the back of that one is the barmaid had listened to me and him talk charcoal for about four years, and one day there was a guy came in. She describes him with a Birmingham accent, and he ordered a pint, and he said to, "Well, I bet you can't guess what I do for a living." And she thought, well, he's bought a pint, so I humour him. So she went through the normal racing driver, stunt double, and all the others. And after he got fed up with the guessing game, he said,
I was going to say, sorry, your camera had gone up. You're back now.
Yeah, that's low battery, which might cause us a problem.
Oh, okay.
This guy, when he got fed up with the guessing game, turned around and said, "No, I'm a charcoal burner." And she just looked him square in the eyes and said, "We got 2 a day. We don't want another one." And he said, "No, I don't mean barbecuing." And she said, "No, you mean going into the woods with a box of matches and putting wood in a steel kiln and making charcoal." And apparently his chin almost hit the bar, drunk his pint quickly, and he went out the pub a bit rapid, which was a bit annoying because LG and myself came in 3/4 an hour later, and we'd have liked to meet him. But he's obviously got away thinking, "Blow me, I thought I was special. I go in a pub in the New Forest, and even the barmaid knows how to make it." So I take from that it's just a job. It's a trade. Don't think you're anything special. It's
What
a job.
a great story, though, for it to be.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
equally, I knew I'd arrived in the charcoal world when I introduced Jim Battle to him, and he used to hold court in the pub amongst the New Forest visitors, saying, "I'm a charcoal burner, and unfortunately, I'm the last of the line. It will go with me." I knew I'd made it in the charcoal world when he changed his story to, "I was a charcoal burner, and there's a couple of nippers coming on, and they're not bad for nippers." Not many people call me a nipper, but to give you an idea, he's still alive, thankfully. He's had a stroke, so his speech is not good, but he's 94, and I'm 58. So I suppose to him, I'm a nipper.
Oh, wow.
Equally, through charcoal, I've met Princess Anne when she opened the living classroom at Bonsley, Blandford, which I think is just outside the AONB area. So I can claim that the courtiers must have really cursed me when she went back with smoky clothing, although I had help from Jim Battle on that one. Because of charcoal, I've met Princess Charles. The association he called a meeting. He wanted to Wealden Down and Grid Shell. We're not quite sure why. We think it was that he wanted to lobby English Nature about reed cutting, but they also wanted thatching spar maker and a charcoal burner to sort of say, well, a way of restoring overstood hazel is to charcoal it. And that was quite an amusing day. Three sets of coppers, one in uniform, one in they'd one in camouflage gear. You kept tripping over them in the shrubbery, and one in allegedly plain clothes. But they'd obviously, I guess, thought, "Oh, we're going to a museum. Yes, it must be like the London museums, because you could spot that transit load of plain clothes coppers. They were the ones in the two-piece suits."
You can spot them from a mile off.
Yeah. I say Alan Walters. It's Alan who has taught me earth burning. He would be another great influence. Yeah, you meet some amazing characters, and you get access to some bits of countryside. I mean, Cranborne Estate are very good to me, and if you like, deliberately, the kiln site is a long way from any houses, so I don't get any smoke complaints from the tenants, and it's a long way from any footpaths, so that I don't get risk people tripping over the wood, risk them coming in and touching a hot kiln or whatever. So that is a bit of countryside that very few people get to see. So equally, there's a character who lives in Old Holt, has lived in Old Holt and Fordingbridge all his life. Peter Lane is fifth generation hurdle maker. One of the woods I've charcoaled in, he remembers cutting in 1950.
Oh, wow.
So, you know, I said to him when did we do that? About 2010. Go on, Pete, just come back in and cut another little bit. So the landowner had changed hands twice by then, so I could equally put the spin on it that the landowners periodically buy and sell it between themselves, but the peasants doing the cutting are the same peasants. You know, but no, it's a reciprocal arrangement. They're getting their wood improved. I'm getting a useful product. You know, the large estates need person power to work the land, and charcoal is still, to some respect, working the land by hand. So you've got to go there, and it's on a human scale. So it can only be done with people. Equally, the AONB have a project to put the amount of woodland back to how it was in the map of 1600. So more is getting planted. It is nice to be part of an expanding forestry enterprise on the Cranborne estate. Although again, one of Pete Lane's saying, when I moan in the winter about the mud that I'm having to drag the wood through, he just says, "Ah, well, Pete," he says, "if the ground was any good, they'd have grubbed it out for corn in 1950, like they grubbed out a lot of good coppices." He says that that's left is the boggy stuff and the springs that wasn't worth grubbing out for corn, and that's why it's still wood. Bottom line, you work with what you got.
That works. Yeah, that's very true. It's nice to know as well that like charcoal is still like, and charcoal burning is still so like quite popular. It doesn't seem like it's a tradition that's dying over time. But also, really quickly, I just wanted to check: have you got enough battery still on the phone? Otherwise, I don't want to take up too much.
Go on, you keep going, and if it fades out, have you got my mobile number?
I don't think so, but I could.
Right. Well, hang on. You keep talking. I will try and do two things at once and look up my mobile number on the other phone.
Okay, sure. There's only a couple questions I've got left.
Okay.
It was mainly just to see what you thought about how the craft had kind of adapted with the times now, and how you think more people could get involved.
Right. Oh, there's an interesting one. Yes, as you say, it is adapted by one steel kiln so that it can be done in a day, or if you've got money, a retort. Most of what is produced today goes for barbecues, although I get more pleasure supplying it to reenactment archaeologists, the experimental blacksmiths, the type of people that like to sort of try and recreate an Iron Age sword or axe. Because one, they use a lot of charcoal at a time, and you don't have to bother putting it in 3 kilo bags. You can supply it in dumpy bags. Right, if you got your pen and paper, 077
Yep.
294
Yep.
37 553. So when we run out of battery, you ring me back and we plan something else. As far as getting into the craft, again, to pick up a chainsaw these days on somebody else's ground or to cut for profit, you need a chainsaw competency ticket.
Oh, that's the last bit of battery.
You'll be ringing me back in a minute. Now, when I did mine, it was a hell of a price, but I think to get the tickets I've got in chainsaws today would cost me over £2,500 worth of training, plus 2 professional chainsaws, plus the safety gear, plus an in-date first aid ticket, plus a vehicle as a mobile toolbox because you can't leave anything on site. You've then gone out and bought yourself a charcoal kiln, and on a good day, you pay. Charcoal burning tends to be akin to the agricultural wage, and equally on a good day, you pay yourself minimum wage. So if you're not careful, you think, well, hang on, I could work stacking supermarket shelves. I wouldn't need the training. I wouldn't need the vehicle. I wouldn't be getting rained on, and I'd earn the same money. Having said that, you don't meet as interesting people. You don't see as much wildlife. And yes, partly where I work in the service industry during the week, it's nice to actually produce a product. And that is what I enjoy about it. So, and unfortunately, again, I'm presently talking to you from home, edge of between Poole and Wimborne. When Father bought this in 1963, it was semi-rural. Unfortunately, the town's crept out towards it. Several people wonder how I can afford to live in Broadstone. But I certainly can't afford to live in any of the Cranborne Chase villages. It's a bit like the New Forest I work on the day job, that I probably see more of Cranborne Chase and more of New Forest than some people that live there and commute up to London. But it is the commuters up to London that have pushed the price of the houses out of anybody that works in their hands. So it's a way of finding some housing that suits you, because I think commuting costs are going to rise as fuel gets tighter. I don't know. You could argue that electric vehicles will solve that one. On the other hand, you can't put a lot of weight on an electric vehicle. But you know, and again, I'm a believer in doing 5 products well, 1 to a fine art and 5 products well, not doing several products. But I mean, I also make a few thatching spars, I make wooden hay rakes, I do a little bit of firewood. Part of that is when you drive home, don't drive home empty. Put some firewood on the car. Again, bring the firewood in nearer the town of Poole. So you stick at it, you'll get some money out of it. And the other thing is, when you're in the woods, there's nothing to spend the money on. So you might not be making much, but you're not spending it.
That's a good point, actually. Yeah.
So if you could work as a husband and wife team, so that my good lady doesn't spend it while I'm in the woods. It's all right. One of the windows is open on the house, but she has. Hopefully, she hasn't seen that, and I will get to eat my tea this evening as opposed to wear it. I think that would be advantageous, and I haven't succeeded in that on that front. She has been up the woods once or twice, but she doesn't like the doesn't like the
not a fan.
The smoke.
Oh no. Yeah. Well, I think that's everything, to be honest. Is there anything you think I've missed or you'd like to go back to?
No, I think for as long as the battery keeps out. You mentioned that charcoal burners seem to know each other, and part of that is there are things called coppice groups. Hampshire Coppice Group is very active. Dorset Coppice Group is very active. Jim and myself knew each other prior to the coppice groups, but it's sort of easier for us to talk in a coppice group environment, because that way the local butcher's shop or whatever is not saying, oh, they're running a cartel, or we take away a bit of the risk of that. We tend to be quite independent people, and on occasions definitely like our own company. Again, doing a service industry during the week, I sometimes there are friends that come out to my charcoal burn, and sometimes I just like to do it on. I don't tell them when I'm doing one, because I think I want a day with me and me chainsaw muffs on and me own little world. Although we have to have a buddy system so that I am not lone working, because again the chainsaw has greatly speeded the job up, and again that's possibly why you've not got the whole family working in it, in that you could probably cut in an hour with a chainsaw what it would have previously cut you a day with an axe. So again, the job has been speeded up by technology. There is also a European Association of Charcoal Burners that have a meeting once every 2 years, and it should have been this year, but I don't think we'll be going to Germany this year, or I couldn't risk it, because I couldn't afford to come back to Heathrow Airport and pick up a travel lodge bill for a fortnight while I was quarantined. So sadly, we won't be meeting, but yes, amongst ourselves we tend to be friendly because it's only like ourselves, and apparently there are about 600 charcoal burners in the UK, albeit with Ben Law winning his planning permission on the back of charcoal burning for a woodland dwelling. There are, shall I say, eco warriors who would claim to be charcoal burners, but I'm afraid I think to myself, no, you're a charcoal burner for housing purposes. And don't get me wrong, it is easier if you live in your wood, because it's a bit like if I'm thinking, is a kiln shut down or not? And I've sort of got two choices. Do I stay here another hour, or do I take a chance and just wait for that plane to go over? That was one thing that was nice during lockdown, was a lot quieter.
Yeah.
Countryside. Yes. Do I stay for another hour? And I'm sometimes faced with the decision of thinking, well, wives are expensive, but ex-wives are unaffordable. And Wend is very patient. But yes, charcoal burners and wives don't always go well together. Whereas if you live on the premises, you think, well, I think that kiln shut down, but I'll go away and have my tea. And when I walk the dog this evening, I'll just come back and have another look. Whereas I've got 16 miles to my kiln site. Guy that I trained in charcoal, Steve Reed, who's doing it in his active retirement, he lives at Holbury and burns at National Trust Mottisfont. So again, he has about 18-mile trip to his kiln site, of which people say, is that safe? And my reply to that would be Oliver Rackham's book, The History of British Woodlands. Oliver Rackham was a professor at Corpus Christi College, and he writes in there the idea of Iron Age man cutting and burning forests for agricultural land, as far as broadleaf timber goes, is akin to the idea of setting alight wet asbestos. Conifer wood can very easily go up in very serious fire, but your broadleaf wood, you're unlikely to set it alight. And my fire is contained in a circular steel kiln, so it's in a box effectively.
A lot safer.
Yeah, so housing and travel is one issue, and as I say, why do you do it? Or another sort of pet subject of mine when I was chair of Hampshire Coppice Group is they tend to call them coppice workers. Now, as a worker, as a charcoal burner, I've got to have all that training. I've got to have my insurance in place. I've got to do a deal with a landowner to get hold of some wood. I've got to go and make me charcoal. I've got to go and sell me charcoal. Possibly got some risk assessments to do. Now, I can think of managers that have less responsibility than that, but they are called managers. And because of that, the hourly rate is somewhat better. So, but, equally, returning to lockdown, the imported charcoal, not as much came in, whether that was they were up to their necks in the pandemic, or whether it was delay at the docks, or for whatever reason, I don't know. I've written something in a couple of newsletters hoping somebody's going to tell me, but as yet I haven't had a reply. So there's the stubborn streak in me that sort of says, well, armed with an axe, or if the iCloud falls out the sky, nobody can get their petrol for their chainsaw, I've still got an axe, I've still got a bicycle, I've still got a shovel. I could go to the woods and I could still make charcoal. I could write you the invoice on a piece of paper, and you could hopefully pay me. So when the iCloud drops out the sky, I could still carry on. Whereas what I do during the week, if the iCloud fell out the sky, that would be the end of it. Battery's holding up well, so we'll just. Yeah. Do you see that as a long-handled shovel?
If you move it to the, I can see that now.
Yeah. Because again, there are some times when you get a flare of wood gas, and you think, oh, I need to earth the bottom up, restrict the air a bit more, and you don't want to get too near it. So if you're fond of your eyebrows, always charcoal with a long handled shovel. And if I just do that, can you see how there's a bit of wear on it, a bit of slope?
Yeah.
Yeah. Sad thing is, I've never sharpened that. That is purely wear by shoveling.
Oh wow.
So I've worn the steel by shoveling earth. I wouldn't mind, but I was on the other end of the handle.
Yeah, it's tiring.
But well, yes. Although on that subject, again, some people say, "Why do you do it?" And I say, "Well, what do you pay in gym membership?" And they say, "Oh, we got a good deal. We only pay £12 a week." And I'm thinking, well, okay, you pay £12 a week to sweat. I get my gym membership for free, effectively. And let's just show you another one of my favourite shovels. Yeah. That is an extended, I know it as a solid fuel boiler shovel. And that's my favourite shovel for emptying the kiln. Now, I don't know how long we've been talking, but the back of my legs needed a stand up. So there is the charcoal burner stool. And that is the charcoal burner stool that I have sat in front of just before Princess Anne came to site. I was sitting down. I was standing up the minute she was on site. But effectively, that has been, and she did actually ask, why is a charcoal burner stool one-legged? So yes. And yeah, I guess when I was young, I didn't know whether to go into the building industry, follow my father. He didn't force me into it, but that's where I did go. I did think about farming and concluded that was all very well if you owned it, but not too good if you didn't, or go into forestry. Mum was very glad I didn't go into forestry because she felt it would have been too lonely. And to some extent, I think I've now got the best of both worlds, building 5 days a week and forestry on the 6th. And Cranborne Chase, as I say, I drive out of Broadstone, go through Wimborne, and about sort of a mile before you hit the Horton Inn, the landscape. And another phrase I've used on an occasion is, as a charcoal burner, I'm like the Miss Marple. And to explain that parallel is, she was the fictional detective, but always used to do a village parallel. And to some extent, some people have travelled to Ibiza and other places, that hot countries, sweat like nobody's business, foreign food, and I have difficulty with the language. I've never done that. I've never seen that much of the world, but I have seen one bit of the world in great detail. And yes, because equally, and it's a good job we're now off camera, but there's a wildlife cameraman in New Forest called Dr. Manuel Hinge. Mm-hmm. And he used to run film evenings in village halls, and there was one evening where me and 4 mates went to his wildlife film evening at Wood Green, which was the bustard society, that bird that they've introduced from Russia and put out on the army ranges. And you had what I call all the cravat brigade there with their World Wildlife Fund badges, and I'm a natural history fan sort of thing. And we get to the interval, and Manuel, they were all making a beeline for a chat with Manuel, and Manuel made a beeline for hurdle maker Pete Lane. Now the good news is Pete was wearing one of his tidier jumpers that evening. It only had one hole in it. And you could see the cravat brigade. Why is he talking to that peasant? Well, the reason he was talking to that peasant is if you're standing in a wood all day working in it, the wildlife sort of get used to you and come and appear again. And Manuel wanted to know, had he seen any woodcocks this year? And he knew that he'd know what he was looking for, and could also put a historical perspective on it. And so some of these sort of extreme people that claim to be wildlife experts in their retirement, and I think, yeah, I see more than you do. I don't go out looking for it, but I see more than and it is a pleasure again, where the kiln site is, I quite often see hares. Didn't see too many this year, but they're back in abundance this year.
Oh, wow.
So, there's all returning to the idea of people coming into it.
Yeah.
How do you put a price on that?
That's
it's not money,
crazy.
but it lifts the soul.
I bet.
Right. Well, keep in touch, and as I say, if the world opens up a bit, come out to a kiln site, or equally Dorset Coppice Group would normally have woodland open days, so we have a kiln up there which is a bit more publicly accessible. Or for my sins, I would imagine it's Linda Nunn that put me forward for this, because I sit on I'm one of the trustees of Cranborne Landscape Trust, which is like the charitable fundraising arm of the AONB, because the AONB, being a government organisation, can't apply for lottery grants and the like. So as this is presumably the 2.5 million that Cranborne AONB got, and is being, some of what it's being spent on is this sort of project, I would imagine I ought to say thank you, Linda Nunn, for the last hour and a bit. There's an early knock off the day job and go and do some civic loft, but I sort of believe in it, because yes, part of the problem is that back and on, the charcoal burners, as I say, didn't write any of this down.
Definitely. Well, thank you so much for your time, Pete. It's been really, really interesting to learn about it, especially from actually listening to a charcoal burner like yourself.
Because did that tie in with what you've read up?
Yes, definitely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
But every burn is different, and then it was a bit like yesterday. Nice dry wood. Breeze was a bit cold to work in, but it certainly helped the charcoal on.
Yeah.
And the wind was blowing up the valley, whereas normally it blows down the valley. But yeah, you can always produce some charcoal, but the trick is maximising it every time.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, well, thank you so much. I'll let you go have your day off, or your evening off work now.
Yeah.
Enjoy
Yeah.
your time.
Yeah.
And I'll mail the consent form to you over the next couple of days.
Yeah, and I'll put that back in the post.
Perfect.
I'll say have a look at the website of the Forestry Heritage Centre, because they are doing a earthburn on August Bank Holiday.
Oh, okay.
Unfortunately, it clashes with Stock Gaylard Oak Fair, where we will have a small retort and a drumlet. And Pete Etheridge, who now works in the same wood as I do, part-time, he's a full-time ecologist, he too does it as a Saturday job. We'd said yes to Stock Gaylard, and we'd said yes to Forestry and Earthburn, which is normally bank holiday May, but before they rescheduled it for coronavirus, so we've said yes to both of them. So we have the little problem of having to light 2 charcoal burns 100 miles apart.
Oh, what a nightmare.
Good job there's 2 of us, but it wasn't quite the holiday we were planning.
Oh, I bet.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah.
Look after yourself. By all means, keep in touch. Consent form.
Will do.
And, or again, final thing with your piece of paper. The most in-depth book I've ever come across on charcoal is called Soul of Fire.
Yeah.
Subtitle: How Charcoal Changed the World, or the Fuel That Changed the World. That's where I sort of get that quote from.
Yeah.
It's by two. I don't like a lot of things American, but I like that. Two American professors with Jewish sounding names. It's Peggy something unpronounceable and something unpronounceable Ormuch from memory. But yeah, Soul of Fire, published in, I think, the late 70s or early 80s. Thankfully, they've republished it in Linkback, because it was fetching a hell of a price, the original. I think I've got two copies. I paid 20 quid for my first one, and I had to pay 35 quid for my second copy.
Oh, wow.
But you know, charcoal back then was about £1 a kilo, so 35 kilos. But normal size barbecue bag of English is about 3 kilos, so effectively 10, 12, 14 odd bags of charcoal, and I paid for it, which tends to be how I work this. That the day job pays the bills, and the charcoal buys a few little luxuries. Albeit we went through a spell 3 years ago with no pay increase, and the charcoal just had to go in the joint account. Yes, so I'd recommend that to you.
I'll give it a look.
You've presumably come across the Shire album written by Don Kelly.
Yeah.
Okay, that's something we should have put on tape, but never mind. I've had the pleasure of, I would say, anybody from the north will say lead charcoal burner in the UK is Don Kelly. Anybody in the south of Birmingham will say Alan Waters. I have had the pleasure of walking across a field towards an earth burn with Don Kelly on my right, Alan Waters on my left. They were both arguing the other one was the greater expert.
Oh, wow.
So again, you talk about magic moments. That was a magic moment. That charcoal burn was done on the Bewley estate.
Mm-hmm.
I went to a film evening 2-3 years later in the Motor Museum, the fundraiser for the Countryside Education Trust, because they showed a picture on the flyer of what looked like an earth burn, but it wasn't quite right. But I thought, it's no good, you've got to go and pay your 6 quid or whatever it was, go and have a look. And it was, the deal was film evening, complimentary glass of Bewley wine in the interval. I took my daughter, so I went for the orange juice because she was about 10 at the time. There was some Eric Ashby Badger filming, which she thoroughly enjoyed. And again, at the interval, you've got the Cravat Brigade sidling up to the then Right Honourable Rafe Montague, now Lord Montague, now his father has passed. And he sort of sidled over and says, excuse me, I recognise you from somewhere. And I said, yes, sir. I said, you'd recognise me if I was in working clothes, sir. I did a charcoal burn for you. He said, oh, wonderful to see you. And shook me by the hand, etc. And again, exactly the same thing from the Cravat Brigade. Why is he talking to that peasant? Didn't make their afternoon. I would have to sort of hide the smile. So, yes, you definitely, working in the woods, you know, there's I don't know whether you've been watching the film Here Comes the Gypsies,
No,
Channel 5, Wednesday night.
No.
Okay, I would particularly recommend last week's episode to you.
Okay.
A gypsy called John Doe, who normally lives just outside Wimborne. His father taught me how to make clothes pegs, because again, returning to earth burning, as well as the gypsies making clothes pegs, charcoal burners made clothes pegs.
Yeah.
Don't think the charcoal burners particularly went hawking. What the charcoal burners did is when they went into town, to the baker, to the butcher, particularly if it was a pretty girl behind the counter, and I'm sorry to be politically incorrect, but I'm afraid this is a bit how charcoal burning makes you. There goes another. Herd Airport's doing well this afternoon. Yes, my understanding is that they'd whittle them out in the woods while they were waiting for the charcoal to cook at the earth burn, and particularly if there was a pretty good, they'd pass them across in the bakers or the butchers in hope of getting a fresher loaf or a bigger loaf or a better cut of meat, and particularly if it was a pretty girl behind the counter, she used to end up with a lot of clothes pegs. so that was my interest in clothes pegs. John Doe's father taught me how to make clothes pegs. He sets up on the Coal Hill Wimborne border each Christmas, just before Christmas, making holly wreaths, and he's now generally left alone. But what his trick was there is the town clerk of Wimborne would come out and say to him, "Come on, you're on council land, move." And he'd listen to the clerk and he'd say, "I would love to, sir, but the Wimborne boundary is there." And he'd point to the left and say, "You're from Wimborne." And the guy would say, "Yes." And he'd say, "Wimborne boundary's there." He says, "I'm actually in Coal Hill by a couple of feet." And then when the Coal Hill parish clerk came out, I believe he told a very similar story.
Genius idea.
So he makes holly wreaths each year, and there are a couple of people I've taught to make pegs, and when they've made a few, I've said, "You better come," and I said, if he'll indulge us, and he generally does, burns rubbish wood on his campfire, nasty stuff with paint on it, like old window frames and other muck. So I take it, I ring him up and I say, if I come out with 2 or 3 bags of good stick firewood, can I just borrow the edge of your hearth for half hour? And he says yes. So there are 3 people that I have taught to make pegs, and then took them back for a masterclass there, so that they can say they learnt on a gypsy fireside. And again, at New Forest Show, had a situation about 5-6 years ago, and it sort of happened 3 shows running, that you had the 16-year-old gypsies take an interest, because they knew their grandfathers had made clothes pegs, but their fathers never had no. There's more money in scrap, there's more money in cars, more money in roofing, whatever.
Yeah.
So the tradition didn't carry on, and I've taught it back into the gypsy community in the forest.
Oh wow, that's so interesting.
Right, I could bore you to tears if I keep going, so I'm going to stop. But the point I was coming to, that the wonderful thing about work in the woods is you rub shoulders right from the gypsies to the right honourable, or in the case of Lord Cranborne, when John Davidson retired, I had to polish my boots and dig my best trousers out and put a tie up. So I have been in the big house at Cranborne.
Oh wow!
Wouldn't have done that without her, and it's the only time you sort of go in something like the Wealden Down Museum, and they have tapestries hanging down the wall. It's the only time I've seen it in an actual lived-in house.
Wow.
A tapestry and like a 1980s sofa.
Wow.
It's a little sublime, but as I say, so all these experiences that I wouldn't have had without charcoal.
Yeah.
You asked, any interesting times. Your tape's not long enough, so I wish you well.